AITA for calling the police when I found catering trucks setting up for my sister's wedding in my driveway, without anyone asking my permission to use my $300,000 lake house? Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. I'm still in shock as I write this, so please excuse me if this seems scattered. I'm Michael, 30M, and I need to get this off my chest because I honestly can't believe what just happened. Some background. 3 years ago, I bought a beautiful lake house about 2 hours outside the city. It wasn't cheap. I saved for years, worked overtime constantly, and made significant sacrifices to afford it. The property sits on 5 acres with 200 feet of lakefront, a private dock, and a restored 1920s cabin that I've poured my heart and soul into renovating. This place is my sanctuary, my weekend retreat, and honestly, my pride and joy. My sister Jessica, 28F, got engaged 6 months ago to her fiancé Ryan. I was genuinely happy for her. Ryan seems like a good guy, and she's been glowing ever since the proposal. Our parents, Richard and Patricia, have been over the moon about planning what they keep calling the wedding of the century. They've spared no expense, constantly talking about flowers, venues, catering, and guest lists that seem to grow by the week. Here's where it gets complicated. My relationship with my family has always been strained around boundaries. My parents, particularly my mother, have this way of making decisions for other people and assuming everyone will just go along with it. Growing up, she'd volunteer me for things without asking, commit my time and resources, and then act hurt when I didn't enthusiastically participate. I've worked hard to establish clear boundaries as an adult, especially regarding my lake house. The property means everything to me, not just financially but emotionally. I've hosted family gatherings there before, but always on my terms, with advance notice, and with clear expectations about respect for the property. It's not that I'm unwilling to share, I just need to be asked, and I need to have a say in what happens on my own land. This morning, I drove up to the lake house for what I thought would be a peaceful weekend of fishing and reading. As I turned into my driveway, I was stunned to see 3 large catering trucks parked on my lawn, along with a rental company van and several cars I didn't recognize. My first thought was that I'd somehow driven to the wrong property, but no, there was my house, with strangers carrying tables, chairs, and sound equipment across my carefully maintained yard. I parked and got out, completely bewildered. A woman in a catering uniform approached me and asked if I was the brother. When I confirmed that Jessica was indeed my sister, she smiled and said they were so excited to be setting up for tomorrow's reception. Tomorrow's reception. At my house. News to me. I managed to keep my voice calm as I explained that there must be some mistake. No one had asked permission to use my property for any event. The caterer looked confused and pulled out her contract, which clearly listed my address and included a note that the bride's family has full access and permission from the property owner. At this point, my hands were shaking. I asked everyone to stop what they were doing while I made some phone calls. I tried calling Jessica first, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably at her rehearsal dinner. Then I called my parents. The conversation with my mother was surreal. When I explained the situation, she seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. "Oh honey, we knew you'd want to help Jessica have the perfect day. The venue they originally booked had a kitchen fire last week, and your place is so beautiful. We didn't think you'd mind." I explained that it wasn't about minding, it was about being asked. My property isn't a public venue. There are insurance considerations, liability issues, and frankly, I had my own plans for the weekend. She brushed off my concerns, saying the family should stick together and that Jessica would be devastated if a reception had to be cancelled or moved at the last minute. My father got on the phone and tried the guilt trip approach. "Michael, she's your sister. This is her wedding day. Surely you can be flexible for one night." When I pointed out that they'd made this decision without consulting me, he said they'd assumed I'd be honored to host such an important family event. The worst part was the assumption, not just that I'd say yes, but that my consent wasn't even necessary. They'd given vendors permission to access my private property, signed contracts on my behalf, and created a situation where I'd look like the villain if I refused to go along with their plan. I'm still at the property now, and the vendors are looking at me expectantly. Jessica's wedding is tomorrow, and I'm apparently the only thing standing between her and her perfect day. But I'm also furious that my family put me in this position. They've essentially forced my hand by creating a situation where saying no makes me the bad guy. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to call the police and have everyone removed from my property. Part of me thinks I should just let it happen and deal with the fallout later. But I'm also worried about setting a precedent that my family can just use my property whenever they want without asking. Has anyone else dealt with family members who just assume they can use your property? How do you handle people who make decisions for you and then act like you're unreasonable for not going along with it? Update 1. Family meeting from hell. It's been a week since I posted, and honestly, things have gotten worse before they got better. Thank you to everyone who commented and messaged. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't crazy for being upset about this situation. So here's what happened. After I posted last week, I was still standing in my driveway with catering trucks and vendors looking at me like I was the Grinch who stole Christmas. I made a decision that I'm still not sure was right, but I couldn't bring myself to ruin Jessica's wedding day, even though I was furious about how it all went down. I told the vendors they could proceed with setup, but I made it clear that this was a one-time exception and that my parents would be handling all coordination, liability, and cleanup. I also insisted that my mother come to the property immediately to sign additional paperwork with the vendors, making it clear that she was taking responsibility for any damages or issues. The wedding reception happened. It was actually beautiful. Jessica looked radiant, and I could see how happy she was. About 150 people attended, they danced under string lights on my back lawn, and everyone kept complimenting the gorgeous venue. Several guests asked if I rented the property out for events, which was awkward since I kept having to explain that I lived there and hadn't known about the wedding until the day before. But here's the thing that really got to me. Throughout the entire evening, my parents acted like they'd done me a favor. My mother kept saying things like, "Isn't this wonderful?" The family all together at Michael's beautiful house. And my father made a toast about how generous I was being. They'd completely rewritten the narrative to make themselves look good and me look like the gracious host, when in reality they'd ambushed me with this whole situation. The morning after the wedding, I asked my parents to stay behind for a conversation. I needed to make it crystal clear that this could never happen again. What followed was one of the most frustrating discussions of my adult life. My mother immediately went on the defensive. "Michael, I don't understand why you're so upset. Everything went perfectly. Jessica had her dream wedding, and you got to be part of it. Isn't that what family is about?" I tried to explain, as calmly as possible, that the issue wasn't the outcome, it was the process. They had made decisions about my property without my consent, potentially exposed me to liability, and put me in an impossible position where I'd look heartless if I refused. "But you didn't refuse," my father pointed out. "So clearly, you didn't really mind." This is where I lost my patience. I explained that the reason I didn't refuse was because they deliberately created a situation where refusal would ruin Jessica's wedding day. That's not the same as consent, that's manipulation. My mother started crying. "I can't believe you're calling us manipulative. We were trying to help Jessica in a crisis. The original venue cancellation wasn't our fault. We thought you'd want to help your sister." "But you didn't ask if I wanted to help," I said. "You decided for me, and then acted like I was being unreasonable when I objected to finding strangers on my property." The conversation went in circles for over an hour. My parents kept insisting they'd done nothing wrong, that family should help family, and that I was being petty and holding grudges. They couldn't seem to understand that the problem wasn't helping Jessica, it was the complete disregard for my autonomy and property rights. Finally, my father said something that really crystallized the issue. "Michael, this is a big house on a big property. You can't use all of it yourself. When the family needs something, we should be able to count on each other." That's when I realized they don't see my lake house as my private property, they see it as a family asset that they have some claim to. The fact that I worked for years to buy it, that it's in my name, that I pay the mortgage and taxes and insurance, none of that matters to them. In their minds, my success means I should be available to solve their problems. I told them that from now on, any requests to use the property needed to go through me directly, with at least 1 month's advance notice, and that I reserved the right to say no for any reason or no reason at all. I also told them that they owed me a sincere apology, not for asking for help, but for the way they went about it. My mother's response was to ask if I was punishing Jessica because of their mistake. She wanted to know if Jessica would still be welcome at the lake house, or if I was going to hold this against her forever. I assured her that my issue was with their behavior, not with Jessica, but that I needed them to acknowledge what they'd done wrong before we could move forward. As of today, I haven't received that apology. Instead, I've gotten several text messages from my mother asking when the family can come up for Labor Day weekend. Apparently they'd already started planning another gathering. And my father sent me a link to an article about the importance of family forgiveness. Jessica did call to thank me for letting her use the property. She seemed genuinely grateful and apologetic about the short notice, but also said she'd assumed our parents had cleared it with me weeks ago. She had no idea I found out the day before. This made me feel a bit better. At least Jessica wasn't part of the deception. I'm realizing this isn't really about the wedding anymore. It's about a pattern of behavior where my parents make decisions that affect me without including me in the process. The lake house situation was just the most egregious example. I've decided to take a break from family gatherings for a while. I need some space to think about how to handle this relationship going forward. I love my family, but I can't keep enabling this behavior by going along with it. Update 2. The damage assessment. It's been 3 months since the wedding, and I'm back with an update that's honestly made me question everything about my relationship with my family. This is going to be long, but I need to get this all out. First, let me address the most common question from my last post. Yes, I did eventually get an apology from my parents. Sort of. About 3 weeks after our confrontation, my mother called and said she was sorry I felt hurt by their decision-making process. She said they never intended to upset me and that they were just trying to help Jessica during a stressful time. It wasn't exactly the acknowledgement I was hoping for, but it was something. My father sent a text saying he hoped we could move past this misunderstanding and get back to normal family relations. Again, not quite what I was looking for, but I decided to accept it as progress and move forward. Here's where things get complicated. Last month, when the weather started getting cooler, I drove up to the lake house to start winterizing the property. What I found there made my blood boil all over again. The damage from the wedding was extensive. I'm not talking about normal wear and tear. I'm talking about significant property damage that should have been reported to me immediately. The most obvious problem was the lawn. What used to be a beautiful, well-maintained grass area is now a patchwork of dead spots, ruts from heavy equipment, and areas where the sod was completely torn up. The rental company had driven their delivery trucks across the lawn multiple times, and the catering equipment had been set up directly on the grass without any protective flooring. There are permanent tire tracks in what used to be my pristine backyard. But that was just the beginning. Inside the house, I found water damage in the kitchen where the caterers had apparently overloaded the sink and caused an overflow. The hardwood floors have water stains that are going to require professional refinishing. There's also a burn mark on my kitchen counter where someone set down a hot pan without protection. The real kicker was the dock. One of the support posts is cracked, and there's damage to the decking that suggests someone drove a heavy vehicle too close to the waterfront. The dock isn't just cosmetic, it's a safety issue that needs immediate attention before someone gets hurt. As I walked around documenting everything, I found more problems. Damaged landscaping, a broken outdoor light fixture, scratches on my hardwood floors from furniture being moved without proper padding, and stains on my Persian rug that I'm not sure will ever come out. I called my parents immediately. The conversation did not go well. "Michael, honey, I'm sure it's not as bad as you think," my mother said. "These old houses always have little issues." When I explained that this wasn't about the age of the house, it was about damage caused by their event, she got defensive. "We can't be responsible for every little thing that might have happened. It was a party. There's always going to be some wear and tear." I asked if they'd noticed any of this damage when they were cleaning up after the wedding. There was a long pause before my father got on the phone. "Michael, we were focused on getting everything cleaned up quickly. If there was some damage, it wasn't intentional. These things happen at events. These things happen when you don't properly protect the property," I said. "Did you not think to put down protective flooring for the catering equipment? Did anyone think about the weight limits for the dock?" My mother jumped back in. "We're not event planners, Michael. We did our best with an impossible situation. I think you're being unreasonable." Here's what really upset me. They weren't denying that the damage existed. They just didn't think they should be responsible for fixing it. In their minds, because I'd agreed to host the wedding, never mind that I'd been ambushed, I'd also agreed to absorb any costs associated with repairs. I told them I expected them to cover the repair costs. My father's response was that they'd already spent a fortune on Jessica's wedding and couldn't afford additional expenses. My mother suggested that since I have money, referring to the fact that I own the lake house, I should just handle the repairs myself. "It's just part of being a homeowner," she said. "Things wear out and need to be fixed. You can't expect us to pay for normal maintenance." I lost it. This isn't normal maintenance. This is damage from an event that you organized without my permission on my property. The conversation ended with my father saying they'd think about contributing to the repairs, but they needed to see receipts and proof that the damage was actually caused by the wedding. He suggested that some of the problems might have been pre-existing and that I was just noticing them now. I hired a contractor to assess the damage and provide repair estimates. The total came to just over $8,000. The lawn restoration alone is going to cost $3,500, the kitchen floor refinishing is $2,200, and the dock repair is $1,800. The rest is various smaller items that add up quickly. When I sent the estimates to my parents, my mother called me crying. She said they couldn't possibly afford that much money and accused me of trying to profit from Jessica's wedding. She suggested I was inflating the costs to punish them for the way everything had been handled. $8,000, Michael? Really? For some grass and a few scratches? This feels vindictive. I explained that these weren't my estimates. They were from licensed contractors who had no stake in our family drama. The costs were what they were. My father's approach was different. He suggested we split the difference and offered to pay $2,000 toward the repairs. When I pointed out that $2,000 wouldn't even cover the lawn restoration, he said I should shop around for cheaper contractors and maybe do some of the work myself to save money. You're handy, Michael. You renovated most of that house yourself. Surely you can handle some of these repairs without paying contractor prices. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were now expecting me to not only absorb most of the repair costs, but also do the physical labor to fix the damage their event had caused to my property. Jessica called me a few days later. She'd heard about the damage and was genuinely apologetic. She offered to help pay for repairs, but I knew she and Ryan were still paying off wedding expenses and couldn't afford it. I told her this wasn't her responsibility. It was between me and our parents. I feel terrible about this, Michael. I had no idea there was so much damage. Mom and Dad never mentioned any of this to me. That's when I realized my parents hadn't told Jessica about the extent of the damage or the repair costs. They were content to let her remain ignorant while fighting with me about who should pay for what. As of today, my parents have contributed exactly $500 toward the repairs. Not the $2,000 my father offered, but $500, with a note that it was to help with any wedding-related maintenance needs. They seem to think this gesture absolves them of any further responsibility. I've paid for all the repairs myself. I couldn't leave the damage unaddressed, especially the dock safety issue. But I'm done pretending this is okay. I've made a decision. My parents are no longer welcome at the lake house. Not for holidays, not for family gatherings, not for anything. They've proven that they can't be trusted to respect my property or take responsibility for their actions. Jessica is still welcome, along with other family members who understand boundaries and respect. But my parents have lost that privilege. When I told them about this decision, my mother accused me of tearing the family apart over money. She said I was being petty and vindictive, and that someday I'd regret putting property damage ahead of family relationships. But here's the thing, this isn't about money. It's about respect, responsibility, and basic decency. If they'd simply acknowledged the damage, apologized genuinely, and made an effort to make it right, we could have worked something out. Instead, they've spent 3 months minimizing, deflecting, and trying to make me feel like I'm the unreasonable one for expecting them to clean up their mess. I'm tired of being the family member who's expected to absorb everyone else's poor decisions. I'm tired of my success being seen as a reason why other people don't have to be responsible for their actions. And I'm tired of being made to feel guilty for having boundaries. The lake house is my sanctuary again. I spent last weekend there alone, reading by the restored dock and enjoying the quiet. It felt peaceful for the first time in months. Update 3. Insurance complications and family fallout. 6 months later, and I thought I should provide a final update since this situation has taken some turns I didn't expect. Thank you to everyone who's been following this saga and offering support. It's meant more than you know. First, the practical stuff. All the repairs to the lake house have been completed, and the property is back to its original condition. The lawn looks great, the kitchen floor is beautifully refinished, and the dock is safer than ever. I ended up upgrading a few things while doing the repairs, so in some ways, the house is actually better than it was before the wedding. But here's where things got really complicated, the insurance situation. About a month after my last update, I got a call from my homeowner's insurance company. Apparently, one of the wedding guests had filed a claim against my policy for an injury that occurred during the reception. A woman had fallen on my dock and injured her wrist, and she was claiming the accident happened because the dock was in poor condition. Here's the problem. I had no idea this injury had occurred. No one told me about it during or after the wedding. My parents certainly never mentioned it. The insurance company was treating this as a standard premises liability claim, but I had to explain that I wasn't even aware there had been an event on my property until the day it happened. This opened up a whole can of worms with my insurance company. They wanted to know why I hadn't reported hosting a large event, why there were no additional liability provisions in place, and why I hadn't notified them of the increased risk to my property. When I explained that I hadn't organized or approved the event, they were confused about who should be held liable. The insurance investigator asked me to provide details about the event planning, vendor contracts, and safety precautions. That's when I realized I had copies of nothing. My parents had arranged everything, signed all the contracts, and coordinated all the logistics. I had no documentation showing that they'd taken any responsibility for liability or safety. I had to hire a lawyer. The legal situation was complex. The injured guest was suing me as the property owner, but I was claiming that my parents had organized the event without my knowledge or consent and should be held responsible. My parents' position was that since I'd allowed the wedding to proceed, I'd accepted responsibility for any consequences. My lawyer explained that property ownership comes with certain liabilities regardless of who organizes events on that property. Even though I hadn't planned the wedding, the fact that I knew about it and didn't stop it meant I could be held partially responsible for any injuries that occurred. This was the most frustrating part of the whole ordeal. My parents had put me in a position where stopping the wedding would have made me look heartless, but allowing it to continue exposed me to legal and financial liability that they had no intention of sharing. The injured guest's lawsuit was eventually settled by my insurance company for $15,000. But here's the kicker: because I hadn't disclosed the event to my insurance company beforehand, and because there were questions about whether this was a permitted use of my property, my premiums increased significantly. My annual homeowner's insurance cost went up by $1,200. When I told my parents about the lawsuit and the insurance complications, their response was predictable. My mother said the injury was just bad luck and couldn't have been prevented. My father suggested that the guest was probably exaggerating her injuries to get money. Neither of them offered to help with the increased insurance costs or take any responsibility for the legal mess they'd created. But the worst part was yet to come. During the legal discovery process, I learned more details about how the wedding had been planned. It turns out my parents had been planning to use my property for months before the venue emergency they'd told me about. Text messages between my mother and Jessica, which came out during the lawsuit, showed that they'd always intended to use the lake house as a backup option. The original venue cancellation wasn't a last-minute crisis. It was something they'd known was possible for weeks. They just waited until the last possible moment to spring it on me, knowing I'd be unlikely to refuse so close to the wedding date. Reading those text messages was devastating. My mother had written to Jessica, "Don't worry about Michael. He'll grumble, but he won't actually say no to family. We just need to present it as an emergency so he doesn't have time to overthink it." Jessica had responded, "Are you sure? He's pretty protective of that house." My mother's reply, "Trust me. I know how to handle Michael. He'll want to be the hero who saves your wedding day." They deliberately manipulated me. The emergency was manufactured, the timeline was calculated, and my emotional response was anticipated and planned for. I wasn't family helping family. I was a mark in their con game. When I confronted my parents with these text messages, my mother broke down crying. But she wasn't crying because she felt guilty about deceiving me. She was crying because she'd been forced to manipulate me due to the urgency of Jessica's situation. "We knew you'd say no if we asked directly," she admitted. "You're so protective of that house, and this was Jessica's wedding. We had to find a way to make it work." My father was more direct. "Sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions for the good of the family. We did what we thought was best." I asked them if they understood that their difficult decision had cost me thousands of dollars in repairs, increased my insurance premiums, and exposed me to legal liability I never consented to. "These things worked out in the end," my father said. "The lawsuit was settled, the house is repaired, and Jessica had her perfect wedding. Everyone's happy." But everyone wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. I was furious, hurt, and done with their manipulation. That conversation was 6 weeks ago, and I haven't spoken to my parents since. They've tried reaching out through Jessica, through other family members, and through increasingly dramatic text messages, but I'm not ready to engage with them yet. Jessica and I have talked several times. She's horrified by the text messages and the extent of the manipulation. She's also angry at our parents for putting her in the middle of this situation and using her wedding as justification for their behavior. "I would never have asked you to host my wedding if I'd known they were planning to ambush you like that," she told me. "I thought it was a genuine emergency, not some elaborate setup." Jessica has offered multiple times to pay for the insurance increase and the legal costs, but I've refused. This isn't her fault, and she shouldn't have to pay for our parents' choices. The extended family has mostly taken sides. Some relatives think I'm being too harsh and should forgive my parents since everything worked out fine. Others are appalled by the level of manipulation and support my decision to maintain distance. My uncle David, my father's brother, called me last week to say he'd heard about the situation and wanted me to know that my parents had tried similar stunts with him over the years. Apparently, this pattern of making decisions for other people and then acting hurt when they object is nothing new. "Your father has always believed that success comes with obligations to the family," David told me. "He sees your lake house the same way he saw my vacation condo, as a family resource that should be available when needed." Learning that this was part of a larger pattern was both validating and disappointing. It meant I wasn't crazy for being upset, but it also meant my parents were unlikely to change. As for the future, I've installed a security system at the lake house with cameras and motion sensors. I've also registered the property with the local sheriff's department and made it clear that any unauthorized access should be treated as trespassing. I'm not sure when or if I'll reconcile with my parents. They'd need to acknowledge what they did wrong, take full responsibility for the consequences, and demonstrate genuine change in their behavior. Based on our last conversation, they're nowhere near that level of accountability. But I'm okay with this outcome. The lake house is peaceful again. I've spent several weekends there recently, and it feels like my sanctuary once more. I've had friends visit, and I've hosted Jessica and Ryan for a quiet dinner. I'm even considering getting a dog to keep me company up there. The most important thing I've learned from this whole experience is that boundaries aren't suggestions, they're requirements. Family relationships can't be healthy when some people think they have the right to make decisions for others and manipulate situations to get their way. I love my parents, and I hope we can rebuild our relationship someday. But that will only happen if they can learn to respect me as an autonomous adult with the right to make my own decisions about my own property. For now, I'm focusing on the relationships that bring joy to my life rather than drama. The lake house is hosting its first intentional family gathering next month, Jessica's birthday party, planned with full transparency, advance notice, and appropriate preparations. And yes, I'm requiring everyone to sign a waiver. Final thoughts. To everyone who followed this story and offered support, thank you. Your comments and messages helped me realize that I wasn't overreacting and that I had every right to be upset about this situation. To anyone dealing with similar family dynamics, trust your instincts. If something feels manipulative or disrespectful, it probably is. You don't owe anyone access to your property, your time, or your resources just because you're related. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a healthy person. And to families who are planning events, please, for the love of everything holy, ask before you assume. A simple conversation could have prevented this entire situation. Respect isn't optional, even among family members. The lake house is still my favorite place in the world. It just took some hard lessons to make sure it stays that way. Edit. Thank you for the gold, kind strangers. And yes, I will definitely be posting pictures of Jessica's birthday party next month, complete with signed waivers and proper event insurance.